When the first bombs fell on Warsaw in September 1939, the city trembled, but not only from the explosions. It trembled from the fear of losing its soul. Amid the chaos, while streets turned to rubble and families fled toward the countryside, one woman walked in the opposite direction, toward the sound of falling walls, toward the crumbling building she had once called her second home. Her name was Zofia, a quiet librarian at the Warsaw Public Library. Before the war, she spent her days cataloguing manuscripts, dusting off the works of Polish poets, and guiding students through shelves of history and philosophy. But when the invasion began, those books, those fragile pages of memory, became contraband. The Nazis didn't only aim to conquer Poland's land. They aimed to erase its identity. In the first weeks of occupation, German soldiers raided schools and universities. They burned archives, confiscated literature, banned publications in Polish. Every page written in the native language was suddenly a weapon. And Zofia understood something most people didn't yet see. Wars can destroy buildings, but when they destroy knowledge, they kill generations. One morning, she found herself standing in front of the library's shattered entrance. The roof had collapsed, glass glittered like ice over the tiles, and a single book, its cover torn, lay open under the grey light. It was a volume of Mickiewicz, Poland's national poet. She picked it up, brushed off the dust and whispered, "They will not take our words." That moment became her mission. Zofia began secretly gathering what was left of the collections. Books hidden under rubble, rescued from abandoned schools, even smuggled from private homes before Nazi officers could seize them. At night, she worked by candlelight, sorting them inside crates labeled as recycling material. By day, she was a librarian. By night, she became a guardian of memory. Her small apartment turned into a miniature archive. Walls lined with false backs hid entire shelves of philosophy, history, and banned novels. She stored them behind furniture, under floorboards, even inside hollowed-out walls. Every visitor had to whisper. Every step was a risk. Sometimes soldiers patrolled the street below. She'd freeze, heart pounding, a book pressed against her chest. If they searched her home, it would mean imprisonment or worse, but she kept going. To her, these weren't just books. They were voices, the voices of a nation the occupiers wanted to silence. One day, she received word from a friend in the resistance. The Nazis planned to clear out the remaining Polish archives for reorganization. That meant destruction. She didn't hesitate. That night, she slipped through the ruins toward what remained of the university library. The city was silent, except for the distant rumble of tanks. The library's front doors had been blasted open, and the inside was filled with ashes. She walked through corridors that smelled of smoke and ink. There, she saw a small corner untouched, a single shelf that somehow survived the fires. Old chronicles, a handwritten diary, and a map of pre-partition Poland. She gathered what she could into a sack. The sound of paper rustling echoed in the silence like footsteps. When she left, dawn was breaking. The sky was red, not from sunrise, but from the fires still burning. For months, she continued this mission. Every book she saved became a rebellion. Neighbors started to call her the Librarian of Warsaw. Sometimes she'd share a hidden book with children in basements during air raids. They would sit together, huddled between walls, and she'd read stories aloud as bombs shook the ceiling above them. Those moments of learning, of imagination, became fragments of peace in a world at war. The children called her Ciocia Zofia, Aunt Zofia. They didn't know that she risked her life every day just to keep those pages alive. Her courage caught the attention of the underground network. One evening, a courier from the Polish resistance visited her apartment. He told her that her hidden books were being copied and distributed among secret schools, places where children learned Polish history and language despite Nazi bans. Zofia realized her efforts had grown beyond her small apartment. She had unknowingly created a shadow library, a network of knowledge beneath the boots of occupation. But the Gestapo was not blind. In early 1943, informants began reporting unusual activity in civilian homes. The secret education movement was spreading too widely, and arrests followed. Zofia burned her personal records, hiding the remaining books inside the walls of a ruined church. When soldiers raided her neighborhood days later, she stayed calm. They searched her home, overturned furniture, tore open drawers. They found nothing. That night, she returned to the church, lit a candle, and sat among the books in silence. The candlelight flickered across the spines. Sienkiewicz, Copernicus, Chopin's letters. Her eyes filled with tears. This was her army. This was her resistance. Years later, survivors would remember that small flame, the woman who, amid the collapse of Warsaw, refused to let her country's words disappear. And when the war finally ended, the ruins of the city hid thousands of books, buried under layers of dust and brick. Many of them had small initials penciled on the inside covers. ZS, Zofia Sienica, the librarian of Warsaw. She had saved not lives, but souls, the collective soul of a nation that refused to forget itself. And though history rarely mentions her name, her courage lived on in every child who learned to read a Polish poem after the war. Because somewhere, in the darkest years, one woman chose to fight ignorance with light. When the guns finally fell silent over Warsaw, the city was unrecognizable. Streets, once lined with bookstores and cafes, were now corridors of stone and dust. Nearly 90% of the buildings lay in ruins. The war had ended, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the bombs. In that silence, Zofia Sienica returned. Her hair had turned grey, her hands thin and scarred, but her eyes, those steady eyes that once read by candlelight, still held the same quiet fire. She walked through the ruins of the public library where her journey began. The marble staircase had collapsed. Iron shelves were twisted and blackened by fire. Only fragments of words survived, half-burnt pages scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. She knelt, picked one up, and read aloud, "Poland is not yet lost." The opening line of her country's anthem, written long before the war. Zofia smiled. The city might have fallen, but the words had survived. In the months that followed, small groups of survivors began returning to what was left of Warsaw. They brought stories, songs, family photos, and sometimes a single hidden book wrapped in cloth. When they did, they came to Zofia. Word spread that the librarian of Warsaw was still alive. And soon her apartment once again became a gathering place. Students, teachers, and workers came to her door carrying whatever scraps of literature they'd managed to save. A poetry book from a burned attic, a notebook buried in a garden, a prayer book hidden behind a brick wall. Zofia carefully catalogued each item, marking them with small notes. Title, origin, condition. She had lost thousands during the war, but piece by piece, the archive began to return home. And then, one evening, a young man arrived, a former member of the underground schools. He held a parcel wrapped in old newspaper. Inside were 8 leather-bound books, undamaged, and a folded letter. "These were found under the floor of a church," he said. "We think you hid them there." She opened one and gasped. Inside the cover, ZS, her handwriting, her hidden library, still intact. Tears filled her eyes as she traced the letters with her fingers. All those nights of fear, all those risks, had not been in vain. The books had waited for her. But Zofia knew her mission wasn't over. Wars do not only destroy buildings, they leave generations without memory. She wanted to rebuild not just a library, but a nation's identity. She began teaching children again, reading them Polish history, fables, and poetry. At first, classes took place in her kitchen, then in the courtyard, then, as more people came, in the basement of a half-ruined school. Every lesson began with the same words: "These books belong to you. Guard them well, for they will guard you." Soon, the new Polish administration took notice. Officials visited her modest collection and asked her to help restore the National Library's archives. Zofia agreed, but only under one condition: that the names of those who had died protecting the books be recorded forever. The records showed dozens of civilians, teachers, students, printers, housewives, who joined her quiet rebellion during the occupation. Together, they had hidden manuscripts under staircases, smuggled banned books across checkpoints, and copied pages by hand when printing presses were forbidden. Their names, once erased, became part of Poland's reborn memory, but the true heart of Zofia's work remained invisible. Beneath the ruins of Warsaw lay the hidden archive, thousands of books she and her allies had buried in sealed metal boxes, hoping one day they would be found. In 1947, during reconstruction, workers digging near the old church discovered them. The boxes were rusted, the paper fragile, but the words still legible. Among them were volumes of Polish history, essays by philosophers, banned literature, even children's stories written by mothers during the war to comfort their sons. When Zofia saw the recovered boxes, she wept silently. All those voices, silenced by war, had spoken again. She spent her remaining years organizing, restoring, and translating what survived. She refused fame, refused interviews. When asked why she had risked so much, she simply said, "Because words are the only things that can survive us." In her later years, she wrote her own diary, one that would never be published, but found decades later among her papers. In it, she described a single night during the bombings when she hid inside the library cellar, surrounded by books and candlelight. She wrote, "I realized that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep reading, even when the world above you is burning." After her death, the rebuilt Warsaw Library opened a small room dedicated to her, a quiet space filled with old manuscripts and a plaque that reads, "In honor of those who preserved our memory when silence was safer." Visitors still come and sit in that room. They open books that smell faintly of smoke and dust, traces of the war's fire, and somewhere between the lines, they find her again. The woman who fought not with weapons, but with words. Because in every war, there are two kinds of victories: the ones that save lives, and the ones that save meaning. And sometimes, a single book can do both.